Great. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining. We're just right at 4 o'clock, but we'll just talk for a few minutes and that'll give us more time for Wendy to talk because that's what we really want to hear. So welcome everybody. We've been doing this program with Faith at Home for a couple months now, and we've been meeting every week and we've had some great discussions. And so I just wanted to let you know that this program was put on and decided on and dreamt about by our Faith Formation Committee. And both Brooke and Shannon headed that up. And we're so grateful that they were so ambitious and aggressive and passionate about this program that they started this. So Shannon actually teaches Godly Play at St. Mark's, and she's been facilitating the program throughout the weeks, as well as Brooke. So Brooke also is ahead of the Faith Formation for the children's ministry at St. Mark's as well. So they've been doing an awesome job. And thank you, Tyler, also for your, you've been here almost pretty much every week if you could. So we appreciate that as well. So welcome everybody. And I think our program will be just an opening prayer. And then we have already asked questions ahead of time. So we already have had them. And Brooke is going to facilitate the questions and ask Wendy about it. And she'll introduce Wendy Claire Barrie as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Father Tyler for an opening prayer.
Okay, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this day, and we give you thanks for the opportunity to meet together in your presence and discern how to follow after you more closely, that our homes might come to resemble the loving community that is your triune person, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We give you thanks for your teacher and theologian in our midst, Wendy Claire Barrie. And we ask that you give us the courage to follow after where you are calling us, that our lives might be transformed from 1.5 hours on Sunday near you to 24 hours, 7 days a week lived in your presence. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, thank you, Shannon, and also Father Tyler for the prayer. As Shannon mentioned, my name is Brooke Parker. I've been working alongside Shannon and Karen to plan this event today, and I'm really excited that it's finally here. And it's my honor to introduce you to our special guest. So today we have with us Wendy Claire Barrie. She is the Faith Formation Specialist and Editor at Church Publishing as of March, where she spent exactly 8 days in the office before New York City shut down. She came directly from 5 years of ministry with children, youth, and families at Trinity Church Wall Street in Lower Manhattan, where Alexander Hamilton is buried, and so apparently is Peter Parker, if you've seen Into the Spider-Verse, which she highly recommends. And so do I. Wendy has served 7 Episcopal churches, large and small, on both coasts in family ministry over the last 30 years. She has a son, Peter, age 17, who's spending his senior year of high school in his bedroom for the time being, and a husband, Phil Fox Rose, who also writes about faith, and whom she and Peter met at St. Lydia's, which is a dinner church in Brooklyn, while she was writing her book, Faith at Home. Lately, she's been doing a lot of anxiety baking and is at work on a new book called The Church Post Sunday School, which will be published in fall 2021. And we'll hear a little more about her book at the end here. So I'm going to turn the time over to her in just a minute, but first I want to explain our format of our meeting today. So like Shannon mentioned, we're going to kind of make it conversational, question and answer, but we've collected a lot of questions beforehand. So for the first portion, I'll be facilitating that. I'll start by asking Wendy to answer a few general questions about herself and her work and what faith formation is, just so we can kind of get our bearings, and those who maybe haven't read the book and aren't as familiar with the topic can get oriented that way. And then after that, we'll move on to some topics and questions that we ended up discussing a lot during our time in the book club. And these questions are a little more specific to our current times we're living in and to our context here in Utah. So that should be helpful for all of us. And then we'll have some time at the end for any other questions that arise as we go through all these topics. And so we welcome you to type your questions in the chat as they come up. If it's appropriate, we might stop and kind of tag them on to a question, or we might save them to the end. I'll kind of try and make my best judgment call on that. And just so you know, we're planning on our conversation lasting maybe a little over an hour, 80 minutes or so. And so, yeah, so with all of that said, let's get to the good part. I'll turn the time to Wendy and she can introduce herself a little more if she wants or make some opening remarks.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've been really looking forward to this. Shannon and I started talking about this a long time ago now, when we thought it might be possible to come to Utah. But that was before the world changed, and it's been lovely to visit with churches all over the country. This has been a maybe not so surprising popular topic, faith at home, in this last year. My book came out in late October of 2016, and it sold more copies last year than it did in either of the 2 previous years. And it's just been really wonderful to be invited into people's homes in a real sense to talk about these things that matter so much to me. So thank you very much for having me. I should tell you that my husband, Phil, is the youngest of 6. And by the time he was born, his parents had left the Mormon church, but they both grew up in Utah, in Provo. And Phil's got a couple of brothers who remained very active in the Mormon church for their lives. And I've only been to Utah to pass through it for skiing, but I do absolutely look forward to, being able to visit Phil's family there at some point and come to your churches. So I know a little bit more about your context than I otherwise might, just by having a husband for whom it has been very resonant.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Wendy. Let's start, like I said, with a few more general questions. So if you could just kind of talk to what faith formation even means to start off.
So we use these words, shaped, molded, formed, to describe how we become who we are. And who we are as people of faith happens in the same way. We are formed by experience. So faith formation is what shapes us. We are formed in and by everything we do. We are formed by worship and service. We are formed by community and relationships. We are formed in our identity as followers of Jesus in just about everything. When we say Christian education, people know what we're talking about. We mean Sunday school, we mean Bible study, we may even mean the adult forum. But at least since the 1980s, those of us in religious education, particularly in the liturgical churches, started using the words Christian formation because we saw the limits of Christian education. That's too narrow a focus. Education is part of formation, but it's only a part. There's so much more.
Great. And can you speak to how you came to care about children's faith formation and get involved in this work?
So I had the benefit of growing up in the church, in a particular church, St. Mary's in Laguna Beach, California, that took my gifts as a child and as a teenager seriously enough to use them every week. I was there from ages 2 to 18, and I thought every church was like my church. I think most kids imagine that. When I was 10, I was paid to help Miss Gigi in the church nursery take care of the babies and toddlers and to show them God's love by reading them stories or changing a diaper or giving them a bottle. I was paid 50 cents an hour. It was a big deal. I got a paycheck in the mail from my church, at the end of the month. It was very exciting. At 14, I started teaching Sunday school. I was also the youngest member of the Christian Education Committee, and it met on Sundays after church, so I could be there. During my freshman year of high school, my parents separated, and for a period of months, my mother stopped going to church. But I got on the bus and I went by myself because I was pretty sure they couldn't have church without me. I really felt needed. And I think that's a huge part of why this is so important to me still. My first job out of college was teaching in an Episcopal school. I taught preschool in the morning and I taught 6th through 12th grade drama in the afternoons. And not surprisingly, St. Margaret's became my church as well. We had chapel twice a week in the preschool, and whenever a priest didn't show up to lead it, it defaulted to the 2 Episcopalians among the preschool teachers. And eventually, I was asked to be the faculty representative on the search committee for a new rector. When it happened that the new rector we hired was from a church I visited, and he asked me to be his church school director. And that really started me on this path. It was a very part-time job then. It was a part-time job for me until 2001. That's when I took my first full-time position. But I have been doing this now I think the 31st year, last year when I moved to church publishing. And it really is just all my passions are held in this one area.
Great, thank you so much. What role do parents and families have in children's faith formation?
I am sorry to say they have the largest role, whether they like it or not. It is something that is incontrovertible. In 2014, I heard the sociologist Christian Smith give the Ensign Lecture at Yale Divinity School. I was not a student there, but I was able to listen in. And he was reporting the conclusions drawn from the 4th wave of data of the National Study of Youth and Religion, which was a longitudinal study of more than 3,000 youth, which began in 2001. He said unequivocally that the single greatest influence on the spiritual and religious lives of American teenagers is their parents, not clergy, not youth ministers, that home is where faith is passed on, not church, not camp, not mission trips, and that the means of transmission is ordinary life practices, not preaching, not programs, not rites of passage. Nothing else, Smith said, becomes even close, remotely close is the quote, to matching the influence of parents on the religious faith and practices of youth. And the statistics are really startling. 82% of children whose parents were active in their congregations, who practiced their faith and talked about matters of faith at home, were religiously active as young adults. Only 1% of older teens whose parents placed little emphasis on religion were religiously active as young adults. And this isn't the only study. We now have 40 years of longitudinal research across the country and across denominations, and actually internationally as well. We've got studies coming out of South Africa, out of many countries in Western Europe, the UK, all showing exactly this. So it is the largest role. Parents play the largest role.
Okay, so with that said, for parents who are maybe not currently doing any active faith practices in the home, or not sure where to start with practicing faith at home, what are a few things that you would suggest to start with?
I think anytime that we can build on something we're already doing, that's the easiest place to start. So you're already having dinner. You could add a table grace at dinner time. And you could start by asking friends and family to send you their favorites, and then have your kids write them out on index cards, or even decorate little cards that if you print them out from the emails that people send you. And that way the kids can take turns choosing which table grace they'll read. They even make some fun wooden dies that have table graces etched into each side of the die that kids can roll and choose a grace that way. Um, I think, dinner is the easiest place to start. If it happens to be the time that you're all together at least a couple of nights a week, and it doesn't take much. Talk about you can talk about the things that happened that day and then look for where God is in that. And you don't even have to start out saying God. You could start really gently by talking about, an act of kindness that you witnessed or experienced, and draw their attention to that. And then you can say, um, that seems holy to me. There's something about that that really makes me think of, however it is you want to unpack that. But you can start gently. Um, you can ask your children to bring something beautiful or treasured to the dinner table to put on a plate in the center of the table, and then you can ask them to tell about why that matters to them, what it is that they like about it, or what it is that it signifies. Um, these are little ways, small, simple things that help make home holy. What I have been doing lately, since the pandemic began, is I've been making beeswax candles. They're really easy, and they come in very colorful sheets. And for us, candlelight always signifies the light of Christ. And it's also something beautiful in the midst of the mess, because this is also the table where I work. I'm speaking to you from my corner of it. But the rest of the table is where we eat. So that having some beauty in the midst of the mess seems to be a really fine metaphor for life right now. Um, it is really, I think, the simplest ways where we introduce this that end up being the most meaningful. And Dr. Martin Luther King's sister tells about how her father told stories about his daily life around the dinner table to his children every night. And sometimes what he had to share were the very, very difficult stories of racial injustice that he faced in the shoe store and at work. And then he told the children about how he was addressing them, what he was doing to change that. And she said these stories were as nourishing as the food in front of us. And of course, we know how those stories inspired Dr. King's life and work. So just talking about our daily lives and what's happening in the world through a lens of faith, of how we're called to respond to what we see and experience, I think is also really powerful.
Thank you. I think you've already spoken a little bit to this, but I'd be interested if you had more ideas. So we had some questions come up in our group about, especially about having older children. So it might be easy to start a practice when you have, toddlers or young children who maybe don't know anything different. But some parents wondered, if you have older children who are a little resistant when you try to add a new practice in, when do you know to maybe keep trying with that practice? When do you know to drop it and try something new? And how do you kind of respect their autonomy and involve them in that process?
So I will expand a little bit on what I started to say about helping children notice that God or the holy or love is in and through everything, is really helpful. And as I say, with older kids especially, you don't even have to start out saying God. If that's odd or strange or something that's been reserved for Sundays, you can frame it as love or that divine spark that is in and through all things. And so this practice of noticing, I think, is really, really important. One of the best questions you can ask anyone of any age, in my opinion, after worship or any experience like a walk, even an argument, is what did you notice? Because immediately that centers their attention on the experience rather than on your opinions or ideas about it. And it's in the experience that we're most likely to make a spiritual connection. So that what did you notice is something, of course, you can ask about a good movie. It can be what you ask about the book that you're reading together, or the one that your child has just done for a book report, because of course all of the best books and movies have themes with spiritual dimensions. And I think another interesting thing that you can ask older kids, especially, ask them to make a playlist of music that inspires them or lifts their spirits, and then get them to talk about it. Play it for you. My son made playlists for both our car trips. We just were in further out on Long Island, and it was an hour and a half by car. And so he had a great time choosing music that he thought we'd both enjoy and find resonant, because, we now have this practice of doing that. And every time I've taught a confirmation class and asked kids to share a song that resonated with them on a deep level, they've come up with amazingly powerful pieces of music, even if, talking about God is the last thing a 14-year-old wants to do, especially at, 1 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. But get them to talk about the music that matters to them. And I think that you'll find all kinds of really rich resources that they already have and just didn't recognize as being having a spiritual dimension. Another really helpful way in for older kids, of course, is talking about the social gospel. The theologian Cornel West says justice is what love looks like in public. And in our baptismal covenant, we promise to strive for justice and peace among all people, and to respect the dignity of every human being. It's important that our kids hear us say, we don't do that to be nice. We do it because it's an essential part of following Jesus. When we pray the Lord's Prayer, we say, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. This is a vital conversation for us to be having right now with our kids in this triple pandemic of illness and racial and economic injustice. We are participating in God's work of restoring the world. We are helping to bring heaven to earth every day in countless small ways. And when they can hear what's their participation in what's happening now, whether they're going on a march for Black Lives Matter, or whether you're helping to stock the food pantry at a time where hunger is at a critical level across the country, that's the work of God right there. That they're helping to they're participating in. So I think that's really compelling to kids from a very young age, but particularly as a way of bringing older kids in. It also is a way that adults come to church. They may come for the participation in changing the world before they come for the longing for spiritual community, and find that they're really interwoven. So that's.
Yes, thank you. I think that's great. This question is a little more specific to our context here in Utah. So some parents wondered if you had any suggestions for helping kids to socialize in a culture like the one we have here in Utah, where one religion is quite dominant and kids can feel maybe left out in their neighborhoods or in their schools. And how can we help them both cope with that reality and also connect across that barrier or that disconnect?
So I feel like we have a comparable environment in New York City, except anti-religion is the dominant culture. um, but one common denominator in our community, I think, is in your community as well. Something that both Episcopalians and Mormons value highly is an emphasis on serving others. Those are I think big. That's something you share. That's common ground, and so that's something to build on, I think. Just there are ways of being Christian that that overlap. So to know what those are, I think is important. I think too, it's fair to say that Mormons are really good at faith at home, and that we can learn a lot from them and from their family practices. We're not necessarily going to use the same practices, but to know that they have them and that it's a big part of how they pass on the faith is something that's valuable for us. Of course, giving your children language to talk about their faith and the things that we do as liturgical Christians, following the circle of the church year, these little ways we've talked about making home holy. These are all things that will help them understand the cultural markers of being Christian. And that's a gift we have as Episcopalians to share with others. We have these wonderful seasons and celebrations, and so when you start, making it a habit to observe the feast of Saint Francis, and make bird feeders and cat toys and dog pulls to donate to the animal shelter or to pass out around your neighborhood, every year in October. That's something that you can invite anyone to participate in, and then you can say, we do this to honor Saint Francis, who loved all creatures great and small. I know that a big difference between Episcopalians and Mormons would be the observance of the liturgical year. So that's something to just to note, and if there are opportunities, I guess it depends entirely on whether you're in a public school or a private school, about whether you're able to share these things in school. But you also may have extended family who are members of this another faith tradition, and so to be able to share about your holy days and what makes them special is really, I think, important. And it's, all kids love celebrations, and so knowing what yours are, and why, and what little traditions mark them, like leaving some carrots in your shoes for the horse that Saint Nicholas rides, and then finding some gold, chocolate covered gold coins in your shoe, and maybe a candy cane after Saint Nicholas visits, is another fun thing that happens all throughout Europe. Not a lot of American families observe the feast of Saint Nicholas. A lot of the ones that I know do because their parents came from countries where that's really a thing. But of course, in church, that's a tradition that we can claim and then pass on for our families at home.
Yeah, thank you. All of that just sparked a lot in me, because we don't have kids yet, but we do have extended family that are Mormon, and a lot of nieces and nephews. And I'm still kind of navigating how to talk, do these cross faith discussions, and little things will come up. Well, like on St. Nicholas Day, we don't have kids. So my husband actually suggested, like, what if we asked our nieces and nephews to leave their shoes out, and we could go drop something off with them and share what St. Nicholas Day is.
Yep.
Or like the other day, my niece found a Godly Play material in my trunk. It was the liturgical calendar material. And I suddenly was like, oh, I need to have like a 30-second, what's this? A 30-second brief, like, oh, it's the church calendar. They mark time with colors in different seasons. And I'm just thinking that was kind of difficult even for me. So equipping our children that might have to answer lots of questions from neighbors or cousins or whatever, with just some confidence or the language to say, oh, this is what it is. I think.
Right. I mean, the Christian language is a foreign language. We have it is fallen out of practice, and in order to be fluent in a language, you have to practice it. So in order to teach it and pass it on, we have to really exercise it. It's a skill, and that's one of the gifts of godly play, of course, is that it really helps kids become familiar with the language, the stories, the traditions.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so we have another question here. Similar, it has to do with our context in Utah. So it says some of us are parenting after in the midst of our own faith transitions from communities which might have been more rigid or dogmatic. So how do we practice faith with kids after or when we're still in the middle of a transition? And that's the first part. And the other is, do you have any suggestions for navigating mixed belief families where maybe
Right.
one parent is practicing and believing Christian and the other's not?
So the first thing I want to say is that it's really important for everyone to hear that you don't have to have everything figured out in order to talk about faith at home. You do not have to know what you believe about everything in order to have meaningful conversations with your children about belief. Seriously, even those of us who do this for a living don't have it all figured out. I see Father Tyler not nodding. My son decided that he wanted to be confirmed with the other choristers in his program, but he was a year younger than they were. And so he had to ask permission from my boss, the rector, who said, sure. And when it came right down to it, at the end of the classes, Peter still wasn't sure that he could be confirmed because he had so many questions. And of course, he wouldn't take my word for it or my husband's word for it. He went to one of our priests who said, Peter, I have doubts every day. And he was just, his mind was blown. She said, but really what makes me a Christian is that I wrestle with these doubts every day and I move forward as though I believe. And she said, in moving forward, that's what keeps me faithful. And it's not faith anymore if you're certain. I mean, that's the other thing that we can say to our kids. I think it's important to tell your children, I don't understand this either. You can say, this is hard for me. You can say, I'm not sure what I think. What do you think? All of these are legitimate ways of having conversations with your kids about hard things. You do not need to be the expert. In fact, your children may be the ones who introduce you to a bigger God, the God of mercy and wonder and love. So I grew up in a mixed belief family, in a sense. My father was baptized in order to marry my mother, which in those days in the Episcopal Church was necessary. And so he didn't attend church with us except Christmas and Easter or for baptisms and confirmation, important events like that. But what really was important was that he respected our practice and our beliefs. At no point did he denigrate them in any way, and we didn't think less of him for not sharing our practices and beliefs. There was really an agreement to mutual respect. What's interesting is that he's still not much of a churchgoer, but over the years, he's become much more curious about faith and much more open to talking about the big questions of life and death and how we find and make meaning and purpose of our lives. And I think it's worth noting that he grew up in a household that didn't talk about faith, and that was true of both his parents. My grandfather was the son of a Jew and a Christian scientist, and so the compromise was that they didn't talk about religion. And my grandmother grew up in an orphanage, so she went to church, but she didn't have anyone to talk to about matters of faith. So I think, this it really became apparent, particularly when my grandfather died, and as my grandmother was herself dying of cancer. She had enormous questions that I had some responses for because I had been encouraged to talk and to question. And, we had some remarkable questions at the end of her life. about, I said, I don't know what will happen after you die, but I know that you will not be alone. You will not be afraid. You will not be cold. You will be held in love. I'm not sure what that looks like, but I know that God is going to be with you in and through all of this. And it made me really sad to know that she had held these worries so close to her and hadn't found a way to ask them before. So I'm just even more convinced that talking about these things and wrestling with them and doing whatever it is that we can to help the conversations happen is really important.
Great. So that leads pretty well into our next question. Speaking of talking about hard things, we had questions on how we can help our kids to process grief and the losses that they're experiencing due to the pandemic.
I'm going to try and post a link here. There. Nope, that's not going to be it. Oh, all right. So I have a link to a great book of resources for responding to change and loss in support of teens and families. It comes from the National Alliance of Grieving Children. So I'm going to try this once more. Edit. And if not, I can at least give you the link to a blog post about it afterwards. I'm just not very adept at doing these things. So the big thing to know about grief is that in order to deal with it at any level, we have to talk about it. We have to name it. We have to be able to express our emotions. Of course, with young children, they may not be able to talk about it, but they can draw it. I do think that it's just really important to name that all of us are grieving right now in various ways. Even if we haven't lost loved ones, we've lost other things. It's been a very challenging time, and I think that all of us know people who've lost loved ones at this point. But there's so much our children have lost. I mean, they've lost school friends just from not physically being together. I don't know whether you were in school now or not physically. Maybe some of you are and some of you aren't.
Some aren't, yeah.
And I think that there are just so many levels of grief for all of us. I mean, this has been a horrible senior year for my son, and he doesn't go to a traditional high school, so it's not like he's missing football games and prom, but he's missing all of his socialization with people his own age, and he's really been struggling with remote learning. Not the part that takes place on Zoom. That part's fine. But the asynchronous work has been very challenging. And, he's a bright kid. He had, nearly a perfect SAT, which he was able to take without everyone studying. I said, oh, don't worry about it. Just take it. You might need to take it over again, but it'll be fine. And of course, no one's been able to take it again. So, he got lucky because he has a very high test score, but he also got incompletes in all kinds of classes for this first semester of his senior year when colleges are looking. And, that just has been a tremendous thing for him to have to adjust to and deal with. And the mixed message of everyone knows that this year is different and you're expected to do your very best is just such a hard thing. And all I can do is say to him and say to everyone else, you know, your mental health matters more than anything else to me right now. I if this weren't his senior year, I would have taken him out of school. I'm willing to say that there are very few things that matter right now, and what matters is how we are all living together, how we are all treating one another. We are in our family really having to practice forgiveness because there are 3 adults in a very small space, and the way we grieve the loss of our autonomy means that we can be very short with one another and very impatient, and you know, emotions flare up out of nowhere, but it's not really out of nowhere, is it? It's just so much that we're dealing with. Um, it's and then of course people are dying, and we can't be with our loved ones the way we want to be. We are not having funerals in a lot of places. I did go to a very, very meaningful Zoom funeral. I felt very weird about it, but it turned out to be an amazing thing, because there's an intimacy on Zoom that is actually even different from being in the same room together in certain circumstances. And we were able to see you know, photographs right on the screen of Maisie and her life, and we were able to hear the choir sing her favorite pieces of music, and we were able to you know, be a part of mourning her in a way that was really, really powerful. On the other hand, some people are waiting until they can physically be together. And of course, all the things that you would do when someone loses a loved one, you know, go over and fold laundry and empty the dishwasher and make tea and, you know, all of that you can't do right now. So trying to find ways of letting people know that you are with them in a different sense is really important. Finding you know, being able to drop off care packages if you live close enough is actually really great, or you know, sending soup. um, there's a wonderful company called A Spoonful of Comfort that has done a tremendous business with long distance soup. You know, no soup that you or I can make can go across the country easily, but you know, other people have figured this out. And just naming those things, just saying, this is so hard. I can't, I wish I could hug you and I can't. I wish I could, you know, come and be with you and help you clean out, you know, your mother's closet. And pack all those things away, you know, whatever it is, for our kids to hear us say this, for them to see us struggling with it ourselves, I think is really important. We don't ever do this alone. And, you know, I have spent a long time living with a certain level of grief, in that my son was a year old when his father died. And so he has grieved differently at every developmental stage. And so in a sense, I think that's what's going to happen with us now, is that we're going to have to learn new ways of once we're able to gather again, we're going to grieve again. It won't be that we've stopped this process or that we fully processed it. It's just going to be something that happens again, and we go through it again, and that's all right. I mean, there's no one way to grieve. I'm trying to post this this link, and does anyone else have a Mac and want to tell me which? Is it Command V? Let's see if that's it.
Oh, got it. We see it. Right?
If someone clicks on it and tells me if it's the resource, then I'll know it worked.
Yep. Responding
good.
to loss and change. I've got it.
Oh, good. All right.
That works.
And we'll pass that along as we post this video. We'll make sure to include that as a link for people to access. Great. So you mentioned at the beginning that you've had more book sales in this last year for Faith at Home than the first few years after it was published. And so it's sort of like we've been in this forced faith at home era, where just by necessity, families have to kind of take charge more of the faith formation in their home of their children. But soon we'll hopefully be transitioning back to public worship again. And I just wonder if you think there are any lessons from the pandemic home church that we can bring back with us when we meet together in person again, and just where do we go from here?
So one thing that I've been doing as I've been talking to churches across the country is that I'm encouraging them to think in terms of households instead of families, because people without children, people with grown children, single people, couples can all see themselves as households. And they have also been hungry for the tangible materials and ways to observe the liturgical seasons, ways to make home holy. This has in no way been limited to people with kids. And so I hope we continue to recognize that making connections between home and church are meaningful for everyone. It has nothing to do with whether you have small children. And I think if we didn't realize it before, we surely know now in our faith communities how much our intergenerational relationships matter and that they have to be nurtured intentionally. I have seen families connecting with older adults, checking in on them regularly by Zoom, if not in person. But if they live close enough, they've been dropping off toilet paper and they've been exchanging homemade bread. And there are adults and kids who've been praying for one another and writing letters like pen pals, and younger children who've been decorating cards that then the person in charge of pastoral care sends to people who are sick or lonely. And the older adults are reminding us that we have gone through hard times before as a society, as a country, and we've learned a lot about what's really important from them. They've been offering wisdom on everything from victory gardens to, what you can you can make, a great chocolate cake without any butter and eggs. It's my mother calls it dump it cake. But it's one of those cakes that came out of a time of scarcity, and I hope when this is over we can find new ways of intentionally connecting to one another, not just in worship. It's been interesting to see that some churches have not been able to offer, if they had both Sunday school and worship at the same time, that hasn't worked any longer for them. So for instance, my friend Miranda, who's a rector of a church why can't I remember? Somewhere in the Midwest. She has been involving her kids and youth in planning worship, which she was never able to do before because they were always in Sunday school. But because she's the person who got to meet with them, she doesn't want to give that up. So when they go back, she's going to make sure that they find ways of involving the kids very specifically, not just once a month, but all the time, and making decisions about worship and participating fully in it, which I think is a huge, big leap for them. And then, of course, there are churches that have been able to offer parallel tracks, but that means that the children are invisible to the adults who are not teaching them. And so there's going to have to be a whole new integration process. And that really brings me to what I'm working on now, which is this book for which the manuscript is due very, very soon, about the church post Sunday school, because there's no reason we should go back to the way things or we shouldn't need to go back to the way things were, particularly if they weren't working very well. And there's a reason that for a lot of places that Sunday school doesn't work anymore, and that's because it was never meant to serve the function that it's served for so many years. It was literally meant to teach poor kids how to read and write. It was not meant to be a means of passing on faith. And so, you know, we are one of the few places where people intentionally come together at all ages, but then we age segregate, and that just does not make sense to me. And so really what I'm writing about is about how and why we need to maintain these connections or make them in the first place if they don't exist. And I'm writing about my own experience of being a child who grew up in a church where my gifts were recognized and celebrated from a very young age, and where I thought they couldn't have church without me, because really, you know, isn't that what we want for all our kids, for them to think that we can't have church without them? So I'm really interested in how we integrate our churches so that everyone is participating in not just worship, but in service and in education and fellowship. Maybe not all the time. I mean, you don't have to stop having godly play, but I think they're just really, really amazing things that we can learn from one another, and that we're not really the church unless we are all together, at least, you know, some of the time, with a lot of intentionality. So.
Great, thank you. I mentioned before we began that we did have some questions come in even just later this afternoon. We've had some parishes that have just had their annual meetings. They're thinking about these things you're talking about, how to move forward, what kind of programs they want to start and integrate. So so one of those questions that maybe this is something you've written about in your book is how to include small children who cannot read into worship.
Yes. It is something I have written about because I had the amazing experience of being a part of the intergenerational worship at St. Paul's Chapel in Lower Manhattan. Now, what's interesting is that this particular service began because Trinity Church has actually two buildings. It has Trinity Church on Broadway, where the National Treasure is, on Broadway and Wall Street, and then St. Paul's Chapel 5 blocks away, which is the oldest building in continuous use in Lower Manhattan. It was built in 1766. It's where George Washington worshiped on his inauguration day. And for 6 years until the pandemic, it was home to a thriving intergenerational community of worshipers. And that service started because Trinity had built a really robust, newly robust Sunday school, and realized that the new families that were coming were not attending worship. And that worship was the more traditional 11:15 choral Eucharist, or the 9 o'clock worship, because Sunday school happened in between, which was more contemporary, shorter service, but families weren't feeling their needs met at either of those services. And so it was pretty intentional that they didn't want just families to come. They wanted children. They didn't want children to be the focus of the service. They wanted children to be fully included in the service. And they spent a whole year thinking about and talking to people about what might help meet those needs. And most of the people who came to that service initially were people who had not come to church before, or had come to church after a very long absence. They were moving away from a more dogmatic faith, a less inclusive faith. And so, you know, that was important to them. But the fantasy was that once people, you know, were allowed to be in this service, that eventually they'd graduate and go to the more traditional worship, and that never happened. The 9:15 service just grew and grew and grew. And we have some really, really intentional ways of including much younger children, such as one of the great gifts for pre-readers was that, and less musical people, was that, we sang the same songs in worship for a whole season. And so you'd hear the same tune several times a month, not necessarily every Sunday, but often. And we'd sing just a couple of verses, and we'd sing some paperless music too. And, the prayers needed to have a repeated refrain, either a sung refrain or a spoken refrain, so a child could easily pick that up without, seeing what was written in the bulletin. We decided that we weren't going to choose who would do certain jobs until we saw who showed up that Sunday. So, children could be invited to carry the cross at the procession. And the only reason there was a procession was so that a child could carry the cross. It wasn't that kind of service, but it's a job to give away, and a fun one too. So, children, as soon as they came in the door, would say, can it be my turn today? And we had offering baskets that were really deep and light, so that children as young as 2 could carry them easily to the front. It grew to the point where at the end we had about 250 people on a regular Sunday. Which was kind of astonishing. And people say, oh, well, Trinity has so much money. Well, you know what? This didn't cost money. We used the children's choirs most of the time to strongly lead the music. All the clergy rotated through. There was not a priest dedicated to this, but we did say it needs to be maybe a 7-8 minute homily, not a 20-minute sermon. And some of the clergy would include, really speak to the kids, but some of them didn't. Some of them just, invited them to sit on the carpet while they talked to the entire room. People had totally different styles, and that was fine. And what was fascinating to me were how many adults who came to that service, both young adults and older adults, because of the energy and the emphasis on joy. So those were the 2 things that I think that really brought people of all stripes and colors to us. It was only 45 minutes. That was another huge gift that we gave families. That way they could come to 45 minutes of worship and 45 minutes of education, and then, go on about their day. I think that's another reason that they didn't graduate to the 11:15 service, because it's an hour and 20 minutes, and longer if you're going to go to education. So we had some big learnings out of that, but finding fun ways to include little ones was really, really great.
Wonderful, thank you. We also have questions just about formation curriculums for children. So this one came in from Ashley at St. Mary. She's wondering if you would recommend Godly Play above any other children's formation program, and if so, why? If not, which other programs would you most highly recommend?
So I had the great honor of representing the Diocese of New York to Province 2, and Province 2 to what we then called the National Church back around 2000. And so since it was clear at that time that the 2 programs, the 2 very best programs the Episcopal Church had to offer were Catechesis of the Good Shepherd and Godly Play, which is actually the Episcopal interpretation of Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, which began in the Roman Catholic Church. And so I have been wholeheartedly recommending Godly Play ever since. I have been in the 7 congregations I've served, 5 of them have been Godly Play parishes, and 1 was a Catechesis of the Good Shepherd church, and the other became a Catechesis of the Good Shepherd church. So it turns out that it's still the very best we have to offer. And about 25 years ago, a church in North Carolina started a program for 6th through 12th graders that was really meant to follow Godly Play. St. Philip's in, I'm not sure where in North Carolina, but maybe Durham, I don't know. Anyway, they started a program they called Journey to Adulthood, and it was really beloved by lots and lots of people. And it was also just a lot of material to wade through, and some of it got dated pretty quickly, particularly because it has a beloved part of it is called Right 13, and it was a journey to manhood and womanhood. And of course, we're understanding gender a little differently now. And anyway, suffice it to say that that curriculum has been completely revised and updated. I'm editing it now at about 1,000 pages for over a 6-year span. So I'll be very excited to see that come, actually leave my editing and go into the world, but we hope to have it available starting this fall. I also had a really wonderful time writing a curriculum for an author named Deneen Akers, who wrote a book called Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints. And she really wanted to aim this book and the curriculum to 8 to 14-year-olds. And because I have a particular interest in intergenerational formation, I also wanted to make it able to scale up to include high school kids and adults. So there are 12 lesson plans available for that now that can easily be stretched to, if you use all the material there, it can easily be 24 sessions or more. And there are 2 Episcopal priests highlighted in the curriculum. One is Broderick Greer, who's at the cathedral in Denver, Colorado, and the other is Will Gaffney, Dr. Will Gaffney, who's a womanist theologian. And it just happened that there are 2 of the people that Deneen profiled in her book. So that was really fun for me. And that curriculum just became available 2 weeks ago.
And that was, again, was it called Holy Troublemakers?
Holytroublemakers.com, I think, is her website, or it might be .org. But yes, Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints.
Great. Okay. Great. That answered the other question that came in, was if you had recommendations for youth or, post Godly Play. So that's excellent. We'll make sure we list those in the resources.
As far as other children's curriculum in general, the Episcopal Church has lesson plans that work free on the website, on their website. Lesson Plans That Work is the name of the site. And those are lesson plans written by people like me, and they go for all ages, and they follow the lectionary. They're really good. And Forma, which is the group of Episcopal educators, has something called Faith, and with the @ sign, home, Faith at Home, which also follows the lectionary, and they have weekly. And it's also intergenerational. It's meant to encompass a wide variety of ages. They have, weekly, at least 5 different things that you can do to unpack the gospel at home or in your church setting. So both of those are free and really, really valuable.
Great. I'm just taking notes so we can pass this on to people. So Lessons Plans That Work. And then the next one you said is Faith with the @ sign? Home. Okay.
Faith at Home.
Faith at Home.
And they've got their own website too. And if I can figure out how to post those too, or I can email them to you and you can put them.
Sure. Yeah. We'll put a little resources maybe under the video when we post it or something. Okay. I think those are all the questions that we had pre-planned and the ones I got in the chat. So I just wanted to make sure if anyone else had something they wanted you to speak to or answer, that we open it up now for that. And I already see Father Tyler waving, so go ahead.
No, I thank you, Wendy. That was great. We've been reading the Jesus and the Disinherited for the Sacred Ground curriculum.
Yeah.
And he was talking about the difference that faith makes for people who have their back up against the wall. And in that same chapter, he talks about, he uses this phrase, if he or she equips themselves in terms of training in this mood. And the mood is knowing yourself as a child of God. And so if you equip yourself in training in this mood, then suddenly what was not navigable becomes navigable and all this kind of stuff. But I thought that was really interesting that he used that word mood rather than if you know your catechism, if you can recite memorized Bible verses. And it got me sort of thinking that the beauty of faith at home and what you're trying to open our eyes to is that faith is something that's caught as much as it's taught, you know, and that we don't need to stress out so much about whether our kids know the, you know, inner workings of the Holy Trinity or not. That it's more a disposition or a mood, like a noticing, gratitude, joy, you know, honest acknowledgement of a grief, you know, whatever it is. But to me, what you're sort of inviting us into practices that evoke that mood rather than sort of things we have to pound into our head and memorize. And does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because really, we're talking about what we carry with us, and that identity as a beloved child of God is not only ours, but everyone else's. And when we can recognize that, not only of ourselves, but of everyone else, I just think, you know, what a difference that would make in the world. I tell parents baptism instruction that, you know, the most important story that they can tell their child is the story of the baptism of Christ from the Gospel of Mark. Because when God says, "You are my beloved child, I am so pleased with you," that's what God is saying to each one of us on our baptism day. So that's the story I want our children to carry with them, and that's the story I need to remind myself of. That, you know, no matter what, you know, nothing I can do will make me more or less beloved of God. And I need to give that grace to myself before I can give it to anyone else.
I see another hand. Maybe Miss Shannon, was that your hand up? Oh no. Okay, I thought I did. Does anyone else have question for Wendy before we wrap up our time, or a comment or anything like that?
And I'm really easy to find. I think you have my website, and you can, you know, I love talking and brainstorming about this stuff. So, you know, if you have a question comes to you later, or you're looking for resources, or, you know, whatever it is, please do reach out.
Wonderful. Thank you, Wendy. I was going to mention too, I don't think it's been mentioned yet, that Wendy's website is wendyclairebarrie.com. She has a blog that she's updating pretty frequently. I can see that the most recent one is about celebrating Palm Sunday at home, which we're coming up upon soon again. I think we did that last year, but hopefully we'll be like a little better at it this year because it's not right when everything changed. So wonderful resources, you know, for anyone that's trying to incorporate new faith practices or observe these, you know, Holy Week, things like that from home, things to do. And yeah, great. I think Karen's going to wrap us up and then we'll have a closing prayer.
Great. Yes, I wanted to say thank you so much. There's so many things that stuck out that I learned that was helpful, but one that really I appreciated was also the lens that we see things through the acts of kindness. And you know, that's the thing, you don't have to have words for everything. And Wendy, I really appreciate your gentle spirit and being able to accept people where they're at in their faith and how we welcome that. It's so obvious of your excitement and your passion that you have in your ministry. So it gives me energy to hear you excited about it. And then it helps with me as well. I feel that. So for your commitment and what you're doing. We are grateful that you're able to spend this time with us. So
Thank you.
it's obvious, it's in your soul and it's your passion, and you shine through with that. And we're grateful for that.
Well, you're kind to say so. Thank you.
Thank you. And a special also thank you to Brooke Parker for helping us with all this facilitating and every weekly our questions and our answers, and for also Shannon Burke for being there every week and putting our agendas together, and Father Tyler as well. They really were the ones that started this program with their great ideas and inviting you, Wendy, after your journey with Jesus workshop. So it couldn't have happened without those people that were passionate about leading going forward. So thank you, everybody. I also wanted to mention going forward for our Faith Formation Committee, we're open to suggestions. We're here to help bring programs.
Oh, I have a book to recommend.
Oh, good. Yay. Okay, you can type that in. But if you have other suggestions, our Faith Formation Committee is made up with youth leaders and priests and parents that are all excited and passionate about trying to find new ideas of how to bring faith formation in to our churches. So
ban Sunday school.
Ban Sunday school. Thanks, Tyler.
No, but I mean that's the whole thing.
Well, I want children in church.
Yeah.
And
right.
And I want them on the altar guild, and I want them
yeah.
Serving alongside you, and yeah.
Well,
when I was going through seminary, we called that the one-eared Mickey Mouse model, Wendy, where you have children out here in their little one ear, and then when they turn 18, everybody wonders why they never go to church, but they've never actually been in corporate worship. So I'm excited to see where you're going to take us, because I think it's a good thing, and not having Sunday school at the same time as worship too. If you're going to do godly play, at least have it where you can do one and the other. I tried that when I first got to St. Mark's, and I got hoisted up on a petard. So
yeah, but there's no reason to go back to the way we've always done things now that we've been doing things differently for a long time. So yes, I want to recommend to you The Hopeful Family, Raising Resilient Children in Uncertain Times, which is the first book I got to bring from proposal to print as an editor. And it came in just the week before the New York City shut down, this title. And we were like, oh, we need this book right now. And it's really good. It's really practical. It's and it's not just, while it's written with families in mind, all the practices can be used by anyone. It's 9 spiritual practices, including gratitude and hospitality and generosity. So I'm just thrilled to have been a small part of bringing that book into the world. But Amelia's a UCC pastor, and has just written a beautiful book.
Well, thank you so much. And we'll post this as well, like Brooke said, on our Facebook page. Please, you're welcome to visit our Facebook page as well. We just basically created that for this group and for going forward. And you can also visit Wendy. And I think at this time, I'm going to turn it over to, Shannon, either Shannon or she wasn't sure if she was going to have internet service or Father Tyler. And it looks like Shannon's off the screen. So Father Tyler, if you could offer up a closing prayer, that would be great. Thank you.
Maybe Wendy can write another book on how lay people can pray too.
Hey, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
I use my prayer book a lot, actually.
Hey, this will be a quick answer to prayer. This is a lay person who's going to pray. I'm sorry, I lost internet service, so I keep coming in and out, but I'm going to pray. I'll make it fast in case I lose everybody. And Karen, I just want to say thank you so much for launching this group. And Wendy, I want to tell you that this precious time with you has been an answer to prayer. Good things come to those who wait. And we waited just about a year to be together with you today. So thank you so much. Would you all pray with me?
Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks, Shannon.
Gracious God, we just thank you so much for this time that we've had to be together. We thank you for this Bible study, for all the ways that we're already growing in our faith and in our journeys to glorify you more and more in our homes. We ask that you would bless us as we continue in this work, that you would guide us into your ways, that you would bring more and more of your of love into our homes. We ask that you would bless Wendy in her work as she continues, and bless us on our journeys and our households. For it's in Christ's holy and precious name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Shannon. You got it in without losing internet. Thank you all, and we look forward to hearing any replies or responses, and in social media you can reach out to us. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.